The winter wind howled like a wounded beast, tearing through the coastal village of Kattegat. As the year 851 CE drew to a close, Olaf Ironhand pulled his bearskin cloak tighter, watching blood seep into the frozen ground. The raid had been successful, but 3 of his men would never return home. One had died from a simple infected cut, a tiny wound that festered over weeks at sea. This was the reality of Viking existence, brutal, short, and remarkably difficult to survive. Most modern perceptions of Viking life come from romanticized tales of glory, conquest, and adventure. The truth was far harsher. Between 793 and 1066 CE, Scandinavian seafarers from modern-day Denmark, Norway, and Sweden carved their names into history through exploration, trade, and warfare. But the average Viking faced daily challenges that would break most modern humans within hours. Consider health and hygiene. Archaeological excavations at Jorvik, modern-day York, England, revealed that the average Viking male stood about 5 feet 7 inches tall, several inches shorter than today's average. Their remains show evidence of arthritis, broken bones, and dental problems that would be easily treated today. Many Vikings died in their 30s or 40s, elderly by their standards. Parasitic infections were common, with roundworm and liver fluke eggs discovered in latrine samples from settlements across Scandinavia and their territories. The sagas celebrate warriors who died gloriously in battle, explains Professor Magnus Thorsen of Uppsala University. But the archaeological record tells us most Vikings died from disease, infection, or malnutrition, the unglamorous killers of the medieval world. Life began harsh for Vikings from birth. In the settlement of Hythabu, modern Hedeby in northern Germany, archaeologists discovered that approximately 35% of children died before age 5. Winter births were particularly dangerous, as food stores dwindled and mothers struggled to produce adequate milk. Infants deemed too weak or deformed were sometimes exposed to the elements, left to die in a practice known as utsetning. This was not considered murder but a practical necessity in a society where resources were scarce and survival demanded strength. For those who survived childhood, daily life presented relentless challenges. The typical Viking diet consisted primarily of barley porridge, dried fish, some meat, usually preserved, dairy products, and foraged plants. Nutritional deficiencies were common. Analysis of remains from the Ridgeway Hill Viking burial pit in Dorset, England, showed evidence of rickets from vitamin D deficiency and scurvy from lack of vitamin C. Their diet was surprisingly monotonous, notes Dr. Marta Magnusson, bioarchaeologist at Copenhagen University. During winter months, fresh produce was non-existent. They relied heavily on preserved foods, which lost much of their nutritional value. Many Vikings were perpetually malnourished by modern standards. The housing situation would shock most modern sensibilities. Viking longhouses, the standard dwelling for families, were single-room structures where smoke from central hearths escaped through thatched roofs. In winter, families shared this space with livestock for additional warmth. Archaeological evidence from Stong in Iceland shows longhouses measured approximately 15 by 5 meters, housing extended families of 10 to 20 people with minimal privacy. The interior air quality was abysmal. Smoke from cooking fires caused respiratory problems, while poor ventilation and animal proximity created ideal conditions for disease transmission. Parasites and lice were ubiquitous. Remains found at Skara Brae in the Orkney Islands showed evidence of chronic respiratory conditions consistent with years of smoke inhalation. Consider the climate. The Viking Age coincided with what climatologists call the medieval warm period, approximately 950–1250 CE, which made some regions of Scandinavia more hospitable than they are today. Yet winters remained brutally cold. In Iceland and Greenland, winter temperatures plummeted to -30 degrees Celsius (-22 degrees Fahrenheit). With no central heating, Vikings relied on thick woolen clothing, animal furs, and shared body heat for survival. The actual reality of Viking raids further dispels romantic myths. While we remember dramatic stories of berserkers and shield maidens, most raids were calculated economic ventures aimed at acquiring resources. They were also extraordinarily dangerous. Based on burial evidence from England and Ireland, approximately 1 in 5 Viking raiders never returned home. Oscar Ivarsson was a successful Viking trader from Birka, in modern-day Sweden, around 925 CE, who left behind a remarkable archaeological footprint. Excavated grave goods suggest he traveled extensively through the eastern trade routes to Constantinople and Baghdad. His remains tell a story of survival against tremendous odds. His skeleton shows evidence of a broken leg that healed improperly, causing a permanent limp. He survived a skull fracture that would require modern neurosurgery today. Metallurgical analysis of his sword shows it originated in the Rhineland, while glass beads in his burial came from the eastern Mediterranean, signs of his commercial success. Yet despite his wealth and status, Oscar died around age 45 from what pathologists identify as a massive infection, likely pneumonia. His success could not save him from the fundamental medical limitations of his era. Viking medical knowledge was rudimentary at best, explains medical historian Dr. Peter Haraldsson. They understood basic wound treatment and some herbal remedies, but had no concept of germ theory. Even minor infections could prove fatal. Surgical procedures existed but were crude. Cranial trepanation, for instance, was performed with simple hand tools to relieve pressure from head injuries, but the survival rate was dismal. The sagas describe healing women like Gudrid the Wise who used herbs, poultices, and spiritual rituals to treat illnesses. Archaeological evidence supports the use of plants like yarrow for wounds and willow bark, containing natural salicylates similar to aspirin, for pain. But without antibiotics, even superficial cuts could lead to deadly sepsis. Perhaps most jarring to modern sensibilities was the Viking approach to justice and conflict resolution. The concept of wergild, blood money paid as compensation for killing, formed the basis of their legal system. A person's value was explicitly calculated based on their social status. In Iceland's Graga's law code, compiled in the 13th century but recording earlier legal traditions, the wergild for killing a free man was 3 marks of silver. Killing a thrall, slave, required compensation only to the owner for lost property. Viking governance relied on assemblies called things where free men gathered to resolve disputes and make community decisions. While this contained seeds of democratic practice, participation was limited to free adult males who owned land. Women, though they enjoyed more rights than contemporaries in other European societies, remained subordinate in legal matters. Thralls, comprising up to 25% of some Viking communities according to archaeological and genetic evidence, had no rights whatsoever. For all their fearsome reputation, Vikings lived in constant fear themselves of natural disasters, poor harvests, and supernatural forces. The discovery of numerous amulets and ritual deposits across Scandinavia reveals a society deeply concerned with appeasing gods and spirits. Thor's hammers, Valkyrie figurines, and runic inscriptions served as magical protection against an unpredictable world. Their religious practices reflected their precarious existence, explains religious historian Dr. Anna Johansson. The Norse cosmology featured a world perpetually under threat from chaos monsters and frost giants. This was not abstract mythology, it directly mirrored their daily struggle against environmental forces that could wipe out entire settlements. Climate change ultimately contributed to the end of the Viking Age. Beginning around 1250 CE, the climate cooled during what's now called the Little Ice Age. For Viking settlements in Greenland, this proved catastrophic. Recent excavations at the Western settlement show evidence of progressive starvation in the final years before abandonment around 1350. Carbon isotope analysis of remains shows a desperate shift from agricultural food to seal meat as crops failed year after year. Even the vaunted Viking ships, technological marvels of their age, illustrate the harsh realities of their lifestyle. The Gokstad ship, discovered in 1880 and dating to approximately 890 CE, demonstrates their shipbuilding prowess with its flexible hull design and remarkable seaworthiness. Yet life aboard these vessels was miserable by any modern standard. With no cabin or shelter, sailors remained exposed to elements day and night. They slept on deck, often soaking wet in cold weather. Provisions were limited to dried meat, fish, and hardtack biscuits that frequently spoiled or became infested with weevils. The psychological toll was immense, notes maritime archaeologist Sven Eriksson. Imagine weeks at sea with no privacy, constant dampness, and the perpetual threat of storms that could sink your vessel in minutes. Add to this the terror of navigation without modern instruments. They relied on solar stones, polarizing crystals, the stars, and familiar landmarks to avoid becoming hopelessly lost. The archaeological record from the Viking fortress at Trelleborg in Denmark reveals evidence of this maritime hardship. Among the graves discovered there, several contain sailors with skeletal markers indicating severe arthritis of the shoulders and spine, occupational injuries from years of rowing. Others showed vertebral compression consistent with heavy lifting and brutal physical labor. The material culture of Vikings does show remarkable craftsmanship. Excavations at Coppergate in York uncovered woodworking tools capable of precision work, along with jewelry-making implements and textile production equipment. The famous Osberg ship burial contained intricately carved wooden objects demonstrating sophisticated artistry. Yet these beautiful artifacts belie the harsh conditions of their creation. Without electric light, craftspeople worked primarily by daylight or smoky oil lamps, leading to severe eye strain and respiratory issues. The average Viking had hands like leather, calloused, scarred, and often missing fingers, explains experimental archaeologist Leif Gunnarsson. Their tools were efficient but dangerous. The beautiful wood carvings we admire in museums were produced through countless hours of punishing physical labor, often in freezing conditions that left permanent damage to joints and ligaments. Female Vikings faced additional hardships. Analysis of remains from Birka in Sweden shows evidence of spinal deformation consistent with carrying heavy loads, a consequence of running households while men were away raiding or trading. Childbirth represented a deadly gambit, with an estimated maternal mortality rate of 1 in 5. Isotope analysis of female remains from Viking settlements shows evidence of nutritional stress during pregnancy years, suggesting women often sacrificed their own nutrition for their families. While recent scholarship has confirmed that women did occasionally participate in combat and exploration, confirmed by DNA analysis of a warrior burial at Birka, the majority faced the relentless grind of maintaining households in harsh conditions. Their work, spinning, weaving, preparing food, managing farms, required constant physical labor from dawn to dusk. The concept of personal hygiene differed dramatically from modern standards. Archaeological evidence, including combs and ear spoons found at sites across the Viking world, suggests they did maintain some cleanliness practices. Arabic diplomat Ibn Fadlan, who encountered Vikings on the Volga River in 921 CE, described them washing their faces and combing their hair daily, though he found their shared washing bowl disgusting. However, regular bathing was limited by practical constraints. Heating water required substantial firewood, a precious resource in winter. Dental health was particularly problematic. Analysis of Viking remains shows severe dental wear from coarse bread containing stone particles from millstones. Cavities were common, and abscesses could turn fatal as infection spread to the brain or bloodstream. Without effective dental care, many Vikings lived with chronic pain from deteriorating teeth. The psychological resilience required to endure Viking life is difficult to comprehend from our modern perspective, explains cultural anthropologist Dr. Helena Bugstrom. They accepted levels of pain, discomfort, and uncertainty that would be considered traumatic by today's standards. Their worldview accommodated constant hardship as simply the natural state of existence. This mindset manifested in their approach to death. The famous ship burials at Osberg and Gokstad represent elite treatment, while most Vikings received far simpler funerals. Cremation was common, with ashes placed in simple urns. Others were interred in mounds with basic grave goods, a knife, perhaps, or personal ornaments. The religion promised afterlife only to those who died gloriously in battle, destined for Valhalla, or of natural causes after living honorably, sent to hell, not to be confused with the Christian hell. By the late 11th century, the Viking Age was winding down. The Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 CE, where Harold Godwin, son of England, defeated Harald Hardrada of Norway, is often considered the endpoint of the Viking era. Christianity had spread throughout Scandinavia, gradually replacing the old ways. The warming climate period was ending. The economic advantages of raiding had diminished as European kingdoms developed better defenses. What can we learn from the harsh realities of Viking existence? Perhaps most striking is how historical narratives tend to glorify exceptional individuals while obscuring the daily struggles of ordinary people. We remember Erik the Red and Leif Erikson for their explorations but forget the countless unnamed Vikings who died anonymously on foreign shores or wasted away from preventable diseases. The Viking experience demonstrates the fundamental relationship between technology and quality of life, observes technology historian Dr. James Peterson. Their impressive ships and weapons represent the pinnacle of their technological achievement, yet they lack basic innovations we take for granted: effective medicine, climate control, reliable food preservation. Even the wealthiest Viking Jarl lived in conditions most modern people would find intolerable. Today's executives studying Viking leadership models might admire their flat organizational structure and consensus building at things, but would likely balk at the physical hardships those leaders endured. Modern military strategists analyze Viking raid tactics while overlooking that these warriors operated without reliable communications, medical evacuation, or accurate intelligence. The physical resilience required of Vikings stands in stark contrast to our climate-controlled, convenience-oriented lifestyle. Their bodies endured extremes: freezing cold, malnutrition, chronic pain, untreated injuries, that would overwhelm most people today. Their psychological tolerance for uncertainty and suffering exceeded our modern expectations. The most profound takeaway, concludes historian Dr. Thorson, is not that Vikings were somehow superhuman in their capacity to endure hardship. Rather, they remind us of the extraordinary adaptability of human beings to difficult circumstances. They created art, poetry, and sophisticated social structures despite living conditions we would consider unbearable. They found meaning and purpose in a world that offered little comfort or security. Perhaps the most valuable insight from Viking history is not their much mythologized warrior culture but their pragmatic resilience in the face of adversity. Their society survived and even thrived through innovation, adaptation, and social cooperation. These qualities remain essential for navigating our own uncertain future, though we might prefer to cultivate them without returning to their harsh living conditions. As the archaeological evidence clearly demonstrates, you would not survive life as a Viking. Their world demanded physical and mental fortitude that our modern existence has not cultivated. Yet understanding their reality helps us appreciate both how far human civilization has progressed and how our fundamental challenges, finding meaning, building community, and facing an uncertain future, remain essentially unchanged across the centuries.